I think it's about time I made an Epitaph guide. I mean, I have mentioned it so many times in my videos as well as top 10 guides that I have done in the past, but I've never made a dedicated Epitaph video. Personally, I feel the Epitaph is one of the most important secondaries to have in Warframe. Bold claim, but let me explain. You see, the Epitaph is mainly used as a primer. People know of it as a primer, and to be very honest with you, I have only ever used this weapon as a primer pretty much all the time. But oh boy was I wrong. This bad boy does some thick damage when using the hold fire. Like, I mean serious damage. So let's talk about the Epitaph and explore all your options and why it's so good. Don't forget to follow me on Twitch. So the first question you're probably asking is, what is a primer? Well, I am glad you asked. Let me show you the way. What are primers and why are they often spoken about amongst the Warframe community? A primer is a utility weapon that has very high status chance. You pair primers with another weapon that has CO type mods like Galvanized Aptitude, Shot, and Savvy, as well as Condition Overload. As these mods state, you deal increased damage per status effect affecting the enemy. This is where your primer comes in, where you will effectively prime enemies with as many status effects for the longest duration possible. This will allow you to deal insane amounts of damage to higher level targets like Steel Path Thraxers, Demolishers, and Necromechs, all the tanky boys that you have to deal with. So why the Epitaph as a primer? The Epitaph has two fire modes. The tap fire, which shoots out a projectile that explodes in a decent radius, which primes groups of enemies with status effects, and a hold fire, which shoots out a single projectile that does huge amounts of damage. The Epitaph has forced cold procs, which slows enemies down and acts as a very good crowd control option. This is mainly for the tap fire. There have been rare occasions where the hold fire will kill an enemy with cold, but we will get into that hold fire a bit later. Right now we're focusing on the tap fire. This cold proc is forced no matter what element you mod for on your Epitaph, and the explosion from the tap fire applies blast too. So this at base applies slash, puncture, impact, blast, and cold before you've modded for elements. Now usually when it comes to primers, you can mod for viral or corrosive if you want to partial strip your enemies without green shards, or full strip them with green shards. You could also mod for magnetic or radiation if you want more CC, but the nice thing is Epitaph comes in handy for this because of the cold. We also mod for an extra element, whether it's electricity or heat. I prefer electricity because that also CCs enemies and stuns them, so it's just more and more layers of crowd control. But heat paired with corrosive will allow you to almost fully armor strip for a short duration. It won't be permanent, but if you're quick enough, you can make use of this to do more damage. When it comes to priming, you want to make sure that the status effects are there for as long as possible. So you want to make use of Augur Seeker. This will increase your status effects duration by 90% and is incredibly useful and allows you to have more time when switching between your weapons. More status chance is important, so we run Sure Shot on our primer build, Lethal Torrent for more fire rate and multi-shot, Anemic Agility for more fire rate again. We then run Amalgam Barreled Fusion. Multi-shot will ultimately apply more status effects, and the Amalgam version gives us 60% dodge speed, which is super nice for a quality of life feature. We then want to make use of the 60-60 mods for all the elements we mod for. This is because each of them have 60% status chance as well as the element that we modded for, and like we have said, the Epitaph has high status chance, which means it scales well with status chance mods. When it comes to the arcanes for a primer build, I personally run Secondary Encumber. Now I know what you're probably thinking, why? Secondary Encumber technically works way better with high fire rates and applying as many hits as fast as possible. Beam weapons are particularly good with Secondary Encumber, but this arcane still works with the Epitaph. It may not work as well, but it still applies 1 or 2 extra status effects with the tap fire, so it's handy to use. If you don't have it, you could just use whatever one you have available, but to be honest, there aren't many arcanes to use with primers other than Encumber. This is what the viral electricity primer build looks like. And this is the corrosive heat build, which will allow you to do a temporary full armor strip. If you have viral on your main weapon, it's a good idea to use the corrosive heat primer, and if you have corrosive on your main weapon, it's a good idea to use the viral primer to apply viral. Now you can, if you want, drop lethal or anemic agility for prime fulmination or normal fulmination to increase the radius of the bubble from the tap fire, but this is your choice. I personally don't like it because I prefer the faster fire rate. Personally, I find the base range to be fine, it doesn't need an increase, but for some of you, you may like bigger AoE. So to finish up on the primer side of this weapon, it's a good option because of the forced cold allowing you to slow down enemies or even freeze enemies, which also allows you to do extra crit damage against frozen enemies. It's an AoE primer allowing you to easily get over 5 status effects and more. In terms of other primers, it's not the best primer, but it's still very, very good. I personally like it because it's just so easy to use, it's quick, and it has a lot of quality of life features as well. If you're wanting to prime a bunch of enemies, then the Epitaph has the best AoE for priming in my opinion, but it's not the best of the best for single target priming. If you want single target priming, I would suggest the new core or compressor. I will make a dedicated guide to all the primers in the game in the future, so stay tuned for that. So primers are really good if you're wanting to do high level content and wanting to achieve huge amounts of damage with your melee or primary weapons. As a newer player or returning player and seeing other people do fat amounts of damage, you will probably notice they prime before shooting their weapon or swinging their melee. Another thing to take note is pairing the Epitaph with Sevagoth is really helpful when using his nuke setup. I've just made a video on him. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. I explain everything about Sevagoth. Also, when wielded by Sevagoth, your headshots deal 20% more damage, and that pretty much concludes the priming side. If I could just ask if you could smash that like button, as it really helps me and the video, thank you so much. Now let's talk about the good stuff. The damage. The hold fire of the Epitaph shoots out a fast moving projectile with some very thick kickback. The Epitaph's charge shot guarantees an impact proc on direct hit. It also has innate 2-meter punch through, and the charge shot has a really high crit chance and crit damage multiplier, so it's really good for single target. The hold fire does have a lot less status chance, but is still good nonetheless. So how do we get this much damage? Well, we mod for corrosive heat so that we can partial armor strip enemies. We then use galvanized shot so that we can scale our damage with all of the status effects. We go up to a group of enemies, or if you want to use it for single target, which I will be honest is where this weapon shines more. We prime them with the tap fire multiple times to apply our partial strip from corrosive and heat. We charge up our hold fire, aim for the head, and they're dead. To be honest, at max stacks, even a body shot does more than enough damage to one-tap most steel path enemies. It's very important to know that galvanized shot does not work with the AoE, it only works with the hold fire, which is used for single target damage. We can also make use of deadhead to increase our headshots even more. We also mod for crit chance, crit damage, multi-shot, and this is what the main build looks like. For this playstyle, you pretty much just spam your tap fire a few times to a group of enemies, finish them off with the hold fire. The nice thing is the hold fire does have innate punch through, which does help with killing more enemies if you line them up correctly. One thing to take note is with the damage build, you're going to need an ammo mutation mod to sustain your ammo. It's very, very important. When you stack up all of your stacks from galvanized diffusion and secondary deadhead, your tap fire can actually delete the easiest steel part targets. In Star Chart, well, this thing is very deadly with the tap fire. For those who are wanting a bit more of a budget build, this is what the budget build would look like. This thing holds up quite well against tougher targets. You can, at base steel path, pretty much just one-shot Thraxes and Demolishers, and that's just the weapon by itself with max stacks. This does not include a damage buffing ability from your frame, which many people run one of the damage buffing abilities like Roar or Eclipse. I would not recommend running Zata with the Epitaph because if you use the tap fire, you will proc the bubble wherever it lands or wherever it decides to hit, and you won't be able to proc the bubble on their heads, for example, allowing you to get those fat headshots. So it's not a good idea unless you're just focusing on your tap fire. If you subsume Nourish onto whatever frame you use, you can get viral while modding for corrosive and heat. This buffs your heat damage over time drastically and allows you to actually delete groups of weaker enemies when your stacks are up. If you are fighting against corpus enemies or enemies with overguard, you can use a magnetic or toxin build, which is pretty good against enemies with shields and overguard. This is what the build looks like. Now, when you pair the Epitaph with certain frames, this weapon becomes deadly. Citrine with her third ability giving you more status chance, and her fourth ability proccing crystals on the enemies to give you red crits when you hit them. You can take advantage of the crystals by directly hitting them with the tap fire or hold fire to get those red crits on enemies. Unfortunately, the AoE doesn't get the red crits, it must be a direct hit. Curlevo, although being OP with every weapon, is particularly fun with this weapon and the alternate fire, as you can do millions of damage to all enemies with a single shot and pairing it with Collective Curse. And then we have Frost and the 101 reworks this frame has received recently. Pairing the Epitaph with Biting Frost, his augment allows you to do some insane red crits on the hold fire, doing stupid red crit damage. it's pretty useful against tougher targets, and it's really fun to play with Frost. Plus he AoE armor strips, so you just do way more damage with the tap fire as well. Then we have the last two, as they are the best with the Epitaph in my opinion. We have, of course, gun buff Siren. Specifically, the raw build is really good because of all the damage increase from all of Siren's abilities. It allows you to delete groups of enemies with a tap fire, and only the really tough targets will need the hold fire. If you do run this with Siren, I would recommend running a Bane on your build, as it scales incredibly well with Toxic Lash. Let's be honest here, Siren works with any weapon, but with this weapon, it's particularly fun. Now, the best for last. If you didn't guess it by now, it's Yareli. Yep. Let me tell you something, my lovely individual watching this. Any secondary with Yareli is going to be good, but with the Epitaph, well, it is particularly fun. Yareli has her C snares, which are absolutely insane because of the damage vulnerability it applies onto enemies. This paired with Nourish over your foot, and her passive give you 200% critical strike chance. When you get your stacks up with all those damage buffs, including the damage vulnerability, well, you can quite literally one-tap enemies with a tap fire. That's how strong it is with her, and that's how much Yareli buffs your damage. I personally use Loyal Guardian because I hate riding the boat, it's annoying, and it will also periodically cast C snares as well, which is a nice bonus. Point is, Epitaph plus Yareli just shreds. You do stupid amounts of damage with the hold fire. Here is the build that we run with Yareli. For my final thoughts on this weapon, I do think it's incredibly important for everyone to have it. It provides so much for you as you progress to Warframe, whether you use it as a prime or as a damage weapon. It offers it all in my opinion, especially with Sevagoth Prime Axis coming out. It's actually a really good Prime Axis, as with Sevagoth you get the Epitaph Prime and the Nautilus Prime. Both of them are really good things to have in Warframe. Otherwise, that is all for today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to see more content. And as always, a massive thank you to all of our channel members, and a special thank you to Bagul, Trum, Joshua, Corix, Shakiro, Darwin, Gilbert, Ayrton Yard, Tythrax, King Wonderbread, Villa, and Oddity Racing. You guys are amazing, and I will see you all in the next one.